Hey everyone, you're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast. In today's episode, we'll be diving into what's top of mind for us right now, where we'll talk about the most timely and relevant topics that are probably on the minds of a lot of people out there in the HR world. Hope you enjoy. Hey everyone, Daniel and Steven here.
Hey guys.
Hope everyone enjoyed the holidays and is having a solid start to 2021. I know I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. I am recording this from the cold weather in Spokane, Washington. So if you notice a different background, that's why.
Nice, man. Nice. Well, I think today should be a good one. We're going to talk about business intelligence, and more specifically, what does that even mean, right? What does it mean, and what does it take to have true BI capabilities with your employee feedback data? And I know you think it's important, Stephen.
Yeah,
I think it's really
absolutely.
important, and I don't think it's ever been more important to be able to make data-driven decisions, right?
Mm.
You need to be able to make decisions off of data and not feelings. I feel like some companies are still struggling to get there, right? People are busy and maybe they don't have time to dig into the data. Maybe they don't have time to set it up the right way, and it can seem really daunting, but I don't think that it needs to be. So today we're gonna try to answer some of the questions on what it takes to get that full picture with your employee feedback data.
Sounds
Because
good.
once you can see the full picture, you can start to look at the data objectively, and it should be a lot easier from there. So I'll kick it over to you, Stephen, and you can talk about what having true BI means to you.
Yeah, thanks. This is definitely going to be a good one. BI is, I think there are different connotations to BI, business intelligence, and specific to reporting on your HR data, employee engagement, whatever it may be. The reality is you're right. I totally agree with your statement earlier that it's never been more important to make data-driven decisions. And I think that's like the goal. That's what every HR practitioner wants to do, at least, a modern people leader, right? And certainly that's what executives are looking for. And, there are still, there's a wide spectrum in terms of what companies are doing. We may talk about a little later just some of the buzzwords and some of the buzz in, HR tech and HR data and analytics. But, certainly there's this promise of machine learning and predictive analytics. And I think that for the most part, that's been pretty disappointing, right? The tech stacks just can't quite do what I think we were all expecting them to do. And certainly I think there's promise and there's hope. And I think every month, every year, those solutions are getting better. But the fact of the matter is that they're not delivering. And so then you have a lot of people that are on the other side of the spectrum that are really taking a scrappy approach. And what that means is they're using spreadsheets, Word docs, PowerPoint to take data from different parts of the HR organization, cobbling that together and trying to make use of that. And that's really hard. It's prone to error, and there are a lot of challenges there. And so for me, real business intelligence is kind of it's in the middle of that spectrum. And I like to boil it down really to four things. And first, data collection is a key part, is a key pillar to real business intelligence. So collecting feedback and your engagement data across multiple channels, so that you have a full picture of the employee experience. And what that means is you're capturing your engagement data, you're capturing your pulse survey data, you're looking at the data that you're accumulating, or if you're not, you're beginning to accumulate data across the entire employee lifecycle at the individual contributor level. So that means new hire surveys, onboarding surveys, exit survey data, et cetera. And so to me, real business intelligence, is collecting data across all of those channels, and you have a common data model so that you can wrap a real modern analytics tool around all of the feedback. which really leads to the second point, second pillar in my mind, which is the ability to understand your data and take action. So, we talked about data, making data-driven decisions, and to truly understand your data, you need to use a modern analytics platform. Whether it's Tableau, Power BI, whatever it may be, you need a modern platform to drive insights. If you embrace a modern platform, you're going to be able to easily slice and dice your data in a variety of different ways, really to narrow down and get that intelligence in terms of where are we having issues and where are there challenges, where are there pockets of disengagement. And it will make it a lot easier to share your data throughout the organization, kind of in a structured way, and really focus your managers on a core set of actionable areas. And the next point really is, can you tell a clear narrative with your data within the organization? With real business intelligence, you can easily look at your data in aggregate. You can drill down into the details. We talked a little bit about this in our last one-on-one podcast. You're going to be able to leverage data from across the various channels, the ones that I just described, and you're going to be able to give your leadership team a clear understanding of what the employee experience truly looks like at your company. And if you're using, Real BI, that's going to be possible by collecting, visualizations from across the various channels and being able to put that together in a scorecard type of format. And the last piece is really having a clear data strategy. And the having a scorecard really requires you to think a little more strategically about what you need to measure and how you're going to report on that to your leadership team. So those are really the four pillars of what real business intelligence means to me. And I think you can really boil it down and make it easy. You should ask yourself, do I have real-time systems and processes for collecting data? Am I able to easily understand the data and take action on what we have? Can we connect data across multiple feedback channels? And then lastly, am I connecting data within other stakeholders and business groups? And am I really able to provide strategic lens into what's going on from an employee perspective?
Okay. That was great. I feel like there's definitely a lot in there. I feel like we need to go, each pillar by pillar and really dig in to some of the points that you made. So let's start with data collection.
Okay.
You mentioned that you need to be able to collect data across the organization at different points within the employee life cycle or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about that. What does that look like? How much data do you need, and where should you be getting that data?
Yeah. Well, the first thing, I think it's important to talk a little bit about some of the challenges we face within HR. Some of those, the multiple challenges that I rattled through, those are different. Those are typically different parts of the organization. So talent acquisition may own your onboarding and new hire survey date process. Talent management may own your engagement data, maybe your pulse data as well, and your employees relations group may have responsibility for the exit survey and what comes out of that. And so one of the challenges is, how do we coordinate with throughout all of those groups to get data in a way that is going to that you can actually make use of. And that is that's the first challenge. And so I think that having that strategy, kind of the last pillar that I talked about, and we'll speak more to that later, is really, really important. Because when it comes to data collection, if you already have the feedback mechanisms in place to gather feedback within all those channels, then you need to coordinate across the groups to get it to a common data model that you can report off of. Because if not, then it's going to be disjointed, and now you're back to spreadsheets. And they're HR practitioners, regardless of where you sit in the organization. I think we've all had these kind of nightmarish, hellish jobs where we had to connect data in highly manual ways, and stay in the office late on a Friday night to get these reports together. And the first advice I would give around data collection is, try to have a clear strategy, already have a clear strategy in place so that you can coordinate within all of these different groups. The next thing that I would say is, you should really think about investing in a modern feedback and modern engagement measurement platform. And there are a lot of great ones out there. And the reason for that is because most of the modern tools at this point will allow you to complete all of those processes, all create those feedback channels rather, within a single system. And if you're using a system that's built kind of in the modern tech stack, then you're going to be able to easily combine the data into some of the reporting and scorecard features that I've mentioned. And so that would be the second thing. From there, you really want to look at how what your data model looks like and what's included in the data model.
Hey, real quick, before we talk about the data model, I just have a few questions. So
Yeah,
you
shoot.
mentioned that one of the biggest challenges is that you have multiple stakeholders across the HR organization
Hmm.
that are owning different points within the employee life cycle.
Hmm.
And I guess that makes it difficult to have coordination between these different points in which you're measuring employee engagement. So I guess talk a little bit more about what that can look like on one end of the spectrum when there's no coordination. What does that look like?
Yeah, it can be a total shit show. Sorry to be crude, but I think yeah, it can be a total shit show, right? And you what you, an organization that is disjointed like that, the first issue is they cannot get buy. It's very difficult to get buy-in and agreement on like what questions you're asking. And so, a little later we may talk about, having, critical numbers. I'm a big believer in critical numbers and having a single number or a few single numbers that you can use to connect and trend across your data model or the feedback channels. And getting buy-in on your talent acquisition team, including EMPS, will be very, very difficult or impossible, right? Because you have these groups that are guarding that onboarding survey, and they've always used the same questions, and it's got 30 questions, and quite honestly it's a nightmare for any employee that's coming on board to complete. But they're trying to do everything for everyone in this survey, and making any changes to that can be really, really painful and really, really difficult. And I think that's just one example of the other thing that I'll add is usually this is just like a small piece of someone's job. And so there's just not a lot of excitement, and there can be resistance to change. And I think that's something that's really, really common across organizations, is just like a resistance to change. And so on that end of the spectrum, that's what you're dealing with. And so you can become disenfranchised when you're dealing with that, you're working with that. You're the talent, let's say you're in the talent management group and you've been asked to create a new strategy and coordinate across all these groups. And typically in an organization that is disjointed, you're just running into resistance after resistance. And so that's what I mean by it can be problematic. And that's very different to in one of the recommendations that I would give to an organization like that is, rather than this being, a function of talent management or a function of, the HR analytics team, you should really bring in the various stakeholders into the process. And if you are, and this could be as easy as, when you're looking at a new platform, if you want to move to an engagement measurement platform or a modern feedback platform, then you can begin to work with the stakeholders to understand and get their buy-in, understand what their requirements are. Use this as an opportunity to kind of take a modern, fresh approach. The current environment is another great reason, or I guess factor that you could look at why you should change. And so there are a lot of strategies and tactics that you can take. But certainly getting buy-in and including the various stakeholders in the process as early as you can will help get you to the nirvana's place of having all of your data within a single data model.
Okay, got it. No, that makes total sense. Okay, so I think I interrupted you when you were about to go into having uh, a common data model that every team is using to collect feedback. So maybe let's go back there.
Yeah. I think that having a common data model is going to be crucial, right? It's going to be important in, if you don't have a common data model, you're going to have to rely on your internal resources to transform your data. And what I mean by that is, typically, if you're in HR, you're already dealing with tight budgets, you're already dealing with limited resources. You're lucky if you have a full IT resource that is dedicated to supporting your HR technology infrastructure, and so you're essentially having to cobble together all the things that you need to really get to the real business intelligence space. And so what challenges that will bring is you're trying to take a round peg and cram it through a square hole, or whatever that's, I always get that saying backwards, but you know what I
Me too.
mean. It's like you're trying to force these things together that don't naturally want to fit together, and you're gonna, again, it's going to lead to a lot of frustration. It's going to lead to a high investment in dollars, in people time to get somewhere where you may not ultimately get the end results that you're looking for. And by having a common data model and using a single platform to collect data, then that's going to make it a lot easier to get the data into a common layout or common structure that you can then use to be an input into your Tableau analytics platform, or
Real quick,
Power
Stephen.
BI.
Sorry, I just have a question. So
Yeah, yeah.
let's talk about what it means to have a common data model.
Okay.
Um, I, I know it might sound straightforward, but maybe if you give an example of what that looks like.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll like boil it down, in really, really simple terms. So let's say that you are using SurveyMonkey to conduct your new hire surveys, right? And you are using Google Forms for your exit surveys. Like, those are two common tools that are used for those two processes. And when you export your data from SurveyMonkey, it's going to be in an Excel format. It's going to have a weird structure. It's going to have things like timestamps and um, and responses and the questions you ask, and that's going to look very different to what you have in your export from Google Forms. Maybe similar, but in terms of what you're exporting, but the layout is going to look different. And one of the things that I'm referring to when I say a common data model is that your data is, when you export your data, it's in a common layout, right? And one of the challenges is, if these are anonymous surveys, then you're having to anonymize the data from SurveyMonkey and Google Forms, because those aren't anonymous platforms. So you're having to like take out data. You may have to add data and manipulate the data to cram those two things together. Another issue that you'll have with those two tools is that you don't have what we call metadata, employee demographic data. And so what that means, in a modern engagement measurement platform, you're going to upfront you collect data from your HR system, and that's going to allow you to not have to ask any self-identifying questions to the employee. You just won't have to ask those, because you're going to store their gender, their generation, their tenure. All of those things will already exist in your modern employee feedback platform. And so with the going back to the example of SurveyMonkey and Google Forms, you're either going to have to ask these questions within the survey, which is not ideal, or you're going to have to use like some form of VLOOKUP. Once you've crammed all the data from your two sources together, you're going to have to VLOOKUP data. If you have employee ID as one of the data elements in your results data, to add all the employee metadata that you need to do your reporting. And so I know I probably just said a lot, and not all of that. If you haven't really run an engagement survey or a process like this before, that may not all make sense. But essentially, there's a lot of manipulation and a lot of
And
administrative work when
y-
you don't have a common data model.
you know what's interesting? When you said common data model, I wasn't even thinking about the layout that the data is coming in once you export it. I was thinking more so like having a set of common employee engagement indicators that you're measuring at different points of the employee lifecycle, whether it's a new hire survey or it's an exit survey or it's an engagement survey that's going out to the entire company. I thought what you were going to say was you need to be measuring the same things at each of these different points. That way you're comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges. So maybe that's just an additional layer, to what goes into having a common data model. Am I right?
Yeah, well, if you look at this as like a foundation that you're just building on, and to get to real business intelligence, or the intelligence part of this exercise, like you need a solid foundation. And yes, like to get to what I would consider like the critical numbers, or the key performance indicators, KPIs, then yeah, like that's 2 or 3 layers up from the data model. You need from a data model standpoint, that's really the foundation, and without that, it's going to be really hard to get to the level of the KPIs, the critical numbers, and really tying, that's the narrative piece that we will talk about here in a sec.
Okay, got it. So it's slightly different. So the
Slightly
data
different.
model, yeah, having a common data model is just having uh, consistency across your either one employee feedback platform or multiple. Like let's say you're using Google Forms and SurveyMonkey for two separate surveys, having a way to combine that data into one larger file that is consistent across the different
That's
demographics
it.
that you're measuring against or whatever it may be. Okay,
That's
that
it.
makes
That's
sense.
it. Yeah. And right now, like to go back to the challenge with, the coordinating with the different groups, usually the data is siloed in these different parts of the organization. And so that's why it's so important to bring these groups together, agree on a strategy. And then once you've agreed on that, then, your next challenge is going to be, working together to ensure that from a data standpoint, you really have a solid and sound foundation that you're working from.
Got it. Okay. So should we talk about the the second piece of that, which we just covered a little bit right now, but having the key performance indicators or a few critical numbers that you're looking at across all of your employee feedback channels. Um, I think it would be really helpful for people out there if you maybe gave 4 or 5 examples of KPIs that you could be tracking, and how a company can get to a set of 4 or 5 indicators that they're tracking. Because I know every company is different. There's going to be KPIs that are more important to one company than that they are to another. So yeah, just break that down for me.
Yeah, no, that's great. Happy to do that. So the first thing that we love to, we're really big, I guess, advocates of having, again, a single number, or a couple of numbers that you're looking at. And so I think the ideal solution, or the end goal, is that you have 1 or 2 numbers that you can tie in throughout the entire employee experience. And so ENPS, Employee Net Promoter Score, is a great way of doing that. It's one way of doing that. I think Employee Net Promoter Score and there are people that love it. You have lovers and haters, right? And the haters are the those that feel like the scoring system itself with employee net promoter score is not ideal, and we can go into that a little more later. But the beauty of, in my mind, of the employee net promoter score, it's a single question that I think we all have interacted with. Maybe not on the employee side, but certainly on the customer side. How likely are you to recommend our product or service to your friends and family? If you've rented a car, or you called a support desk, a help desk, whether it's Apple Care or whomever, you've answered some form of net promoter score. And so an employee net promoter score is not a measure of employee engagement. We look at it more of employee advocacy. So do we have an employer value proposition that's so strong that you, Daniel, as an employee, you would actually go as far as recommending the company to your friends and family, or to people you know? And so that question is very easy to include in the new hire survey process. It's very easy to include in your engagement surveys, your pulse surveys, and exit surveys. And so that's why we're big proponents of EMPS. But if you're not feeling EMPS, the other question that you can ask is ESAT, employee satisfaction. So how satisfied are you with company name? And so that's a similar but not a different twist. And that's also another question that's very easy to ask. And for all of the IO psychology kind of geeks and purists, and that I'm me included, that ESAT has a lot of research, and it's one of kind of the OG original questions to ask in the employee engagement space. And so that's another safe question to ask, but you want to have at least a single question that you can weave into all of the different channels. And the reason for that is trending, right? You can begin to look at, okay, we're doing great with in our engagement and pulse data. It looks like we're doing great from an overall core engagement perspective, from employee advocacy, EMPS. It also looks like we're doing really, really well. But when we look at our engagement data, we see, oh, well, with employees that have only been here 0 to 6 months, we're seeing lower core engagement scores. And then, if you shift and you have, you've weaved a single number into all of the feedback channels, then you can look at your new hire and onboarding data, and you can look at, okay, well, let's dig a little deeper into the EMPS scores, and a real business intelligence platform will allow you to do this, right? And you're going to be able to look at your new hire and onboarding data in aggregate, so you can look at, okay, for all of the new hire and onboarding surveys over the last 3 months, 6 months, what does EMPS look like by department? Ooh, in sales and marketing, we've got low EMPS for those new hire onboarding surveys. And so that is like a very clear and specific example of if you have these metrics in place, then you have the data model. You've got your data model. You've got a platform that will allow you to roll out these feedback channels that will measure the entire employee experience. Then you can start to start to think about the more strategic elements, like what are the key metrics that we're going to look at. And
That,
sorry,
no,
go ahead.
I was going to say that makes a lot of sense, because now that you explained it that way, I'm thinking about if I'm the CEO, right? And I hear that 5, 6 people from, the engineering department have recently left, and they're all voluntary attrits, meaning that they've chosen to leave. They weren't fired. And I'm like, okay, so what's going on with engineering? And then I go look at the last company-wide employee engagement survey,
Yes.
and I see, okay, it looks like for the engineering department, they scored really, so the ENPS is already, it's trending down from the last survey, from the last engagement survey. But for this one, it looks like there are a few areas that they're really unhappy with. Maybe it's with management, maybe it's with communication, whatever it may be. You're like,
Hmm.
okay, I can sort of see the story here. Okay, so they were frustrated with management, and then a few months later, you have 4 or 5 people leaving. But then you can look back even further, and you can see, okay, what does the experience look like for new engineers that we're bringing onto the team?
Right.
And you see that maybe engagement is really high for the first week or two, but then, about a month in, 2 months in, the apathy starts to set in with these new hires. It
Absolutely.
dips. And then you can see the full picture. Okay. So in the new hire process, we aren't providing them with enough training or whatever it may be. So that's like
Hmm.
the first screw up. And then you can go look at the engagement survey and you can get really specific about what it is about management that's really frustrating them. Maybe you sent out a follow-up survey and that follow-up survey is asking specifically about management. And
Right.
then you go look at the exit surveys and you see consistently in the qualitative feedback that everyone was frustrated with the management. So I can see how if you have a common data model and you have a singular system for collecting employee feedback, how that can be really powerful. And if you
Well,
have maybe
and
one or two numbers that you're tracking throughout that life cycle, you can tell that full story. And as a CEO, you can figure out where within that life cycle you need to make some changes.
well, that's it. Yeah, and this is really, really think about like where we are today. We 2021. We're 2 days into the new year. Thank goodness. I think we're all relieved and excited about that. And but the fact of the matter is we're still dealing with like a year. Like I don't want to call it a lost year, but certainly a really, really challenging year that we're leaving with 2020. And so everything was different. Everything was disrupted, from how you onboarded your employees to how employees interacted with their managers to everything changed. And here we are, today. If I'm a CEO, I'm like thrilled about the prospects, for the future, getting back to normal, whatever that means. And so this has really never been like more important, like the need for real business intelligence, because the if we can start to look at these things, then you're making it really easy for me as a CEO, HR, to agree to like what are the things that we need to do to give you everything you need to unblock, fixing our onboarding process, or fixing, getting managers some training that they need, because we're still going to be in some form of hybrid work environment for at least another 6 to 9 months, maybe longer. And so I think it would be a really, it's going to be play to your strategy for the upcoming year as an HR executive if you're doing this, and b, you're as a CEO, like, your HR group has never catered to what you need, um, like this before. And so I think it's a win-win for everyone involved. But there it is a lot of work, going back to kind of what the topic that we were just leaving. But yeah, I think you nailed it. Having the critical numbers, that's a great example of how you can navigate your data and start to tell that narrative that we were talking about.
Yeah. So I might have gotten us a little bit sidetracked.
That
Um,
is
where
perfect.
where were we? So we talked about data collection and how important it is to
Hmm.
have a common data model and a few uh, critical numbers that you're looking at. Um, where should we go next?
Yeah, yeah. I think a good topic would be, talking a little bit about the narrative that you're telling. A common, and the reason I say that is just it's I think it's a natural segue from what we were leaving. One of the things that I mentioned is, the real business intelligence means you can easily look at your data and aggregate and drill down into the details. It's shocking to me that how many people are still cobbling together, and when I say people, I mean HR teams, HR executives, are cobbling together PowerPoints that are, are still largely text copy, and also are you're bringing in like these crude, I guess, visualizations that are trying to tell the narrative. And I think that having a disjointed a presentation of your data, it makes it, will make it really challenging, right? That could lead to the narrative that you're trying to tell, being really, really disjointed as well. And I'm sure, I mean, you're in marketing, so you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. The difference between having, taking a scrappy approach and trying to cobble together something to really communicate a clear kind of objective or get buy-in to a critical decision that you need from a marketing standpoint. That the same holds true in HR. And so I just wanted to spend a little time digging into that a little deeper, in terms of what it means to be able to tell a really clear narrative. And I'm sure you see this on the marketing side, having having to cobble together these really, your CEOs asking you for a presentation on marketing analytics, or kind of your marketing metrics.
Yeah.
Have you ever experienced challenges with that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think what you're referring to is having like a scorecard, right? A
Yeah.
scorecard where you have maybe the 9 or 10 most important numbers that either, your boss is asking for, or the CEO, whoever it may be. But that's definitely something that I think all companies struggle with if they don't have a way to pull in all of that data, into one area. So for me, we use, I can't remember I think it's called Chartio. So very
Chardio.
similar to like a Power BI or a Tableau, but to your point, we're pulling everything into a BI system. That way, all of our data can live in one place as the source of truth where we're going in. So
Hmm.
I could see how that would be very powerful if I were an HR team and if I could pull in, all of my employee feedback data, um, into one central hub that I can then slice and dice. Is that what you're describing?
That's exactly what I'm describing. Yeah. And the time that it takes to put together, with no Chartio or whatever tool you're using, in the absence of that, right? The time that you use to put together kind of the presentation for your CEO, that is going to be, you're spending all of your time on the administrative. So now we're back to the old days of HR. And by having a real business intelligence solution in place, or like a commitment to real business intelligence, you've invested in the tools, right? And what I love about your example, it sounds like that's still kind of a scrappy tool that you're using, but effective, right? And so I'm not saying that everything has to be high dollar and has to be the most sophisticated tool to use. In fact, there are a lot of ways that you can do this on low budgets. And so, but yes, so you, by taking this, I guess, a more modern approach, you're not cobbling things together, and you are using like real visualizations to support your story. You can then begin to focus on, the narrative, right? And you're going to get sick of me saying this, but I'm so passionate, and I'm just so bought into, the storytelling component of your data, that I think it's important to spend time talking about this. That when you're kind of neck deep in the admin of getting your PowerPoints, your decks together, I think there's a real loss of time in the strategic aspect, in terms of what is the data really saying. Are we telling a compelling story here? If not, let's start over. And if you have a good tool set in place, then that shouldn't be a difficult process. And within HR, another challenge is there are a lot of layers. There are a lot of stakeholders that you need to get through. And so, going 2 or 3 levels up to, your chief people officer, and having to come back and start over on telling, a better narrative, it's going to be a lot easier. And again, the end goal to me with real business intelligence is cutting down on the admin time so that you can focus on telling a really compelling story around your data.
Got it. So cutting down on admin work where you're pulling, multiple spreadsheets all into one spreadsheet together, or trying to combine, the multiple data models as you described earlier. So yeah, no, that makes sense to me. Um, how, what steps can, like, let's say you're a company that is doing that right now.
Mhm.
What's one baby step that they can take to get closer, to the desired state of having all of these things in place that we've discussed? Like, if there were one thing that they could do, what
Yeah,
would that be?
I think I'm a big believer in leveraging the power of your network, and earlier I made the comment that the the promise of AI and machine learning, it's been a bit, it has not been there, right? It's been a bit disappointing. And again, I just want to double down on my comment that that's not. Don't get me wrong, like there are sophisticated organizations that are doing great things out there, and I think a great baby step is just getting further educated on what the best in class companies are doing, and leverage your network, and reach out to people like those that are. I hope you guys can hear the passion in my voice about this topic. And there are others, like the people that do this, they love doing this. And so I would say, a great baby step would be, first, mapping out, what those feedback channels look like. So going through the steps that we talked about earlier in the podcast, and really looking at like what would those feedback channels be for our company, and reach out to others and see like what others are doing and how they're bringing the data together. And I think that would, and reach out to some of the service providers, some of the vendors out there. Like, right, I think, one thing I'm sure in the marketing space, this, like one great source of feedback, or I guess what other companies are doing is talking to, the marketing salespeople and understanding of the tools and options, the latest and greatest tools that are out there, just to see how others are leveraging these things. And so that would be my recommendation, would be that you first look at, okay, so if we were going to do this, some of the things that Stephen and Daniel, mentioned resonate. What would that look like for our company? And then, I think, a natural progression from there would be looking, talking to people and understanding, okay, well, what is company, ABC, looking at my peers in my industry and talking to them and see what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. That's something that I often do. If I'm ever stuck, I'll look around. I'll go on to LinkedIn and see what some of the people that I respect are saying, how they're leading their teams, what strategies and tactics are driving, everything that they're doing. So I could see that being extremely helpful in HR. If you have, maybe a mentor or two that you've worked with in the past that you really respect, reaching out to them and seeing what they have going on, what's working for them. So I love that advice.
Yeah, and I would, we've talked a lot about having like an AMA, Ask Me Anything component to our podcast, the Modern People Leader podcast, and I think that, we may be able to help our audience out, if we can get to that AMA format, because I think that there are a lot of details we could be going a little deeper into. And so let us know, reach out to us and let us know what you're thinking, what you want, what you would like, what would be useful to you in terms of, I guess, taking this to the next level. Because that's the end goal with this podcast, is sharing some of these best practices that should be easy to get to, but aren't always as easy as you would hope.
Yeah, and just thinking back on, some of the stuff that we've discussed already in today's episode, I feel like we could drill into each of those topics and spend, 20 minutes on each of them. Like, what are
For
the best
sure.
practices as far as like the demographic data that you're tracking? Like, is it, you know, location? Is it gender? Is it age? Is it tenure? Like I myself have a bunch of questions, so I'm sure everyone out there probably has even more questions. So yeah, um, if anyone has any questions that come to mind, feel free to reach out to Stephen or I. All right, so I want to talk a little bit more about people in the space that, or people in HR that might be chasing this really uh, sexy dream and promise of AI and ML um, within, you know, employee feedback data.
Mhm.
Where should we where should we even start with this? What's real? What's not real? Um, yeah, I'll let you go, Stephen.
Yeah, I would be
In
interested to get
in
your thoughts because I think both of like what we do, there's been this promise of
yeah.
AI and machine learning, and and so I would love to hear how what the parallels are,
Oh
because
man.
in
Yeah.
some ways I view that marketing tech is a year ahead of the HR tech space and in terms of kind of using the buzzwords and
Yep.
getting to market and seeing what the market's responding to and then doubling down on that feature set. But as far as the what we have found within HR is that that the this kind of ideal state where machines are able to predict and tell you and with real pinpoint accuracy what your engagement data is I guess pointing to or what issues you in a predictive way you should be focusing on is has just not been it hasn't been done at scale and I believe that it will be done, but it is just especially with something like people, right? And employee feedback. I think that in some ways, marketing is almost better suited for predictive analytics and machine learning, AI, insert buzzword, because there's a little more structure around the data from a marketing perspective. But within HR, it is it can be highly unstructured, and I think that depending on what solution you're talking about, I think there are some cool neat things that have been done, but as far as what the promise that we've all been chasing or hoping for, it just hasn't been there. And I think some of that again is a limitation of how unstructured HR data can be. But I do think another challenge or issue is that the it's really hard to apply machine learning at scale to HR and employee feedback. And so those are the things that that I kind of when I get in conversations with clients, and they're asking when I ask about really like what are you trying to get to, what solution, what would be the benefit of AI machine learning. When we work through those conversations, what we find is that there's a lot of kind of more practical solutions that they're looking for that don't require AI machine learning. And that's why for me in many organizations, like they don't even have what we've been talking about, what I believe to be real business intelligence in place. And so for from our perspective, we believe that like let's one of our my mission and kind of purpose right now is to help companies get real business intelligence in place as quickly as possible, so that when the promise of machine learning and AI, when these things are truly there, you're in a great position organizationally to take advantage of that. Because some of the things we're talking about are going to be required inputs, but we believe like right now your energy and the value of your time should really be spent just focusing on getting to this kind of true business intelligence solution. But I'm
So
curious, what is your experience been on the marketing side?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Stephen. Um, on my end, as a marketer, being sold to by other marketers, um, you learn by getting burned a few times, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you get sold on this grand,
100%.
when somebody's telling you that their company has true AI or machine learning capabilities, and then you onboard and you're like, so what about the AI and ML? And they're like, oh yeah. And they start hemming and hawing, and you're like, they don't actually have AI or ML. They just have real people on the back end that are going in and looking at the data and making recommendations, which is
Hmm.
fine. But I think a lot of times people just like to throw around the buzzwords of AI or ML. And I think because a lot of people don't truly understand what AI or machine learning, what that even really means, they just
Hmm.
accept it and they're like, oh wow, they must be doing some cutting edge stuff. And they just take it at face value and don't
Right.
really do more investigation. So that
And,
leads
and
me to that
I'm
leads me to the thought that I had, which is if you are a buyer and somebody is telling you that their HR platform, whatever it may be for, provides uh, AI or ML, what are some questions that people can ask to see if that is actually true? Because I feel like even for companies that say that they have true business intelligence, they don't even have true business intelligence. So, and I feel
right.
like there's a fine line between having it and not having it. So how do you uh, I guess pull the curtain back and see if what they're selling you is actually true or it's just snake oil? Like, what are some questions that you can ask?
Yeah, well,
We can
I
start with the AI and then we can talk about business intelligence.
perfect, perfect. So I think within AI, in what I've experienced in the HR space, it's really similar. Like there's a certain point in the demo, and I don't know if this resonates with you, but there's a certain point in the demo where the salesperson will show you like a widget or a cool visualization or like a cool like bubble chart, and that's usually the machine learning, um, predictive analytics portion of the demo. And I would that would if you experience this, then I would encourage you to like right there drill in. Like that's the time that you should really ask, um, what how it works, right? And how, not only how it works, but how will that benefit me in HR in as a primary employee feedback engagement, data and analytics stakeholder. How is that going to benefit like me? How is that going to make my job easier? And how is that, why should I feel confident that that's that this feature is going to make, I guess, our presentation of the data, the narrative, more reliable or believable. And because the problem is with a lot of the proprietary machine learning AI that's built into some of these platforms, it's kind of black box, right? You're seeing a cool feature, but in terms of really what's going on behind it, that's really hard to explain. And I think that's really in the reason we see high abandon rates on these features is because when you get the data in front of your stakeholders, your CEO, your C-suite, they're going to ask some really, really great questions about the data. Like, how did that, what determined that? How was it, how did the HR platform, your analytics program, how did you conclude, that these are like in fact true, or they should be these kind of conclusions, or insights, are reliable? And that's where you start to you kind of creep back into a hole because you're like, and the reality is that you can't explain it because typically the vendor can't explain it, and so then there's high abandon rate. So now you one of the reasons you purchase this tool, this high priced platform, is because they had these features, only to find that you're actually not going to leverage those the functionality the way you thought you would. And so, just remember these words. Like when you get to that point in the demo, when all the buzzwords are, the ML, AI, predictive analytics, that's the point in which you should really dig in and, ask questions on, what is the sample size of data that the algorithm was built off of? How will this benefit me? How do you see your other clients leveraging this? How do you know that, how can you ensure that these insights are really something that we as an organization can stand behind?
Yeah, I think that's great. So now that you've addressed how to sniff out whether a company actually has real AI or ML, I think that we should do the same for business intelligence. I think that a lot of vendors promise having advanced analytics, and then whether it's in Martech or HR tech or basically everyone out there promises that they have advanced analytics, and most of them don't.
It's kind of table
Um,
stakes, as we've
yeah,
talked
yeah, it's
about.
kind of table stakes. And what is, I know the whole topic today is what is true business intelligence, but what's the difference between a pretty uh, I don't know how to say this, but like a pretty like dashboard that gives you like very high level analytics, like what's the difference between that and true advanced analytics and business intelligence? Like how deep should you be able to go? Do you have
Yeah,
any?
and yeah, no. I understand completely, and I like to keep it simple. And what I would say is, when you're looking at that, and I don't agree with this, but the reality is, like today, the likelihood of a CEO, uh, even an executive leadership team, maybe even your senior leadership team, going into an HR platform and pulling their own analytics is highly unlikely. And so, and we've talked about like scorecarding. I mean, there is this notion, and in our last podcast, we talked about like, well, who owns engagement, right? Is it HR? Is it the manager? And so, there is kind of manager access, and I think that that is useful for managers. But when you think about, business intelligence, the reason why you want a business intelligence tool is so that you can better inform, your leadership team, your executives. You can make data-driven decisions overall at the company level, and at a lower level as well. And so as you're looking at the, whatever technology it is that you're assessing, I think, you have to, like, can you see yourself building a deck, and telling a narrative with the data that you're using from that tool. And I think that's like the most simple way, because in the worst case scenario, a PDF export, you really need things in your branding, and you can't just use the off the shelf functionality from whatever tool it is that you've procured. You're going to end up having to use this platform to tell the narrative on your own. And does it give you the visualizations that you would typically use in any other HR deck or executive presentation that you would use? And I think that at the most basic level is, we there are a lot of other things that that I could go into, but
I
I
love
think that
that.
that's
I love that
the
example.
easiest way.
Yeah. So give a quick example of what a potential slide would look like that you'd want to be able to pull out of the visualizations that are available within your analytics platform.
Yeah, well, I think that the ability to view the data in aggregate, and in very kind of simple layout is the first thing, right? You're going to want to look at your data in aggregate company wide, in a variety of different cuts, and depending on what it is, I could go into details, but it would vary depending on what we're looking at, new hire or exit, or we're looking at all of it. But the most important thing is that you can view your data in aggregate, meaning, you can view, if it's new hire, you can view a collection of new hire data all together, in aggregate, or exit data or engagement data. And so I think the first thing that you really want is the ability to do that in a real clear way, and the ability to then start going into a deeper level and looking at departments, locations. Again, the whole slicing and dicing of information. Is that really easy to do? And does it feel like the visualizations are still telling a story that can be easily understood? Are there the types of visualizations that you personally as an HR organization like to use, and your executive team? There's the analytics snobs would say, oh, well, you shouldn't be using donut charts or bar charts, but the best tools out there give you the ability to visualize the data. It's your data. So visualize it how you want. Do you have the ability to generate heat maps? These are all things that I think are hallmarks of a true business intelligence platform. Can you filter in ways that are intuitive, that make sense to you, that will allow you to drill deeper and deeper? And so I would say that that's the key thing. And then look at the functionality itself. And you may want to like cross-reference, Tableau and Power BI are just two. Domo's another. Chartio, I think, is one that you guys use on the marketing side. And so familiarize yourself with that functionality, and then look at the vendor, right? A lot of the solutions out there are really just like a web form that's really, really sexy, but it's just a single web form that is being filtered. And the issue with that is that can be, again, if it comes down to you having to build something to tell the right narrative, that could be very difficult to use, and it just may be non-usable. So those are some of the suggestions that I would give.
Got it. Yeah, I feel like C-levels love to use the term to double click or to triple click into a data set. So
Yeah,
you're saying have the ability to easily double or triple click into whatever it is you're looking at.
right. Right. And know what, makes you, as you're going through the demo, your assessment of whatever tool it is that you're going to use, have really go into the platform to see the double and triple click happening. Because again, you could be enamored with a very, elegant looking web form, but at the end of the day, it's just that. It's just a web form that's just being filtered.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. All right, Stephen. I mean, I feel like we covered a lot today. Is there anything else that you wanted to quickly talk through related
No,
to?
I like to just close these up with some final words, and the final words, I kind of got ahead of myself earlier, but the time, this is going to be, there's good news ahead. The horizon looks great in terms of like where things are going, and so I think this is a perfect time for you to be exploring and asking yourself those questions that we talked about earlier. Do I have real time systems and processes for collecting the data? Am I able to easily understand the data I do have? How am I connecting the different data sources? And then can I tell the narrative? And so this is the perfect time as an organization. I just want to just reiterate that how important, and the difference could be a really, really successful year for you as an HR practitioner and HR executive, to get even further along that curve of having more strategic conversations with your business. And so I just would highly encourage, this is obviously a topic that's near and dear to me, but I think this is a great time for you to be having these conversations within your organization.
Awesome, Stephen. I I love all of it. I completely agree. I think it can be really easy as an individual contributor who has 100 things that you're responsible for on any given day, or your boss has 4 or 5 things that they've suddenly thrown upon you, for you to not set a good foundation for whatever it is you're doing,
Yep.
and then 2 months later, realizing, oh crap, with that survey we sent out, now I have to, cobble all of that data together and try to pair it with, the new hire surveys and exit surveys and try to tell a story, but I don't even know where to start. So yeah, I can see how challenging it can be for someone in HR, when it comes to being more data driven, especially when, the analytics piece of it is probably just 10% of what you're doing in your everyday job.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thanks for the great chat today, Daniel. I'm looking forward to our next one.
Me too, man. Have a good
All
one.
right.